So, Jonny and Laura, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure.
Hello.
Hello.
Lovely to see you. Jonathan Broadbent, Laura Moody. Jonny, we've known each other a very, very, very long time. I'd say probably about 24 years, 25 years.
25 years, yeah.
And I obviously know Laura because of you. Can you both tell us who you are, what you do, how you've got there?
Okie dokie.
You go.
Me first. I'm Laura Moody. I'm a musician, and I work as a cellist, as a singer, and as a songwriter and composer and theatre performer. Yes, my career is a sort of Venn diagram of all of those things. So I do solo work as a singer-songwriter, where I play the cello and sing, and then I also write music for theatre, and I also perform in theatre. And what else do? I do, a sort of a portfolio of things, shall we say? And then I also do session work as a cellist and
You
as
do a cabaret gig?
I work in cabaret. I work, over quite a lot of different. I kind of do what I do within quite a lot of different umbrellas.
You arrange string work?
I do. I arrange strings for film music. So quite a range.
We've sort of worked together, Laura, haven't we? When I did a project a long time ago, when your quartet, was it a quartet?
Oh, yes. I was in a string quartet for 15 years, and we did a live film soundtrack for a silent film at the Art Centre. Yes.
Which was one of the highlights of my career, I have to say.
Ah, that's great.
She has to say that.
She has to, yes.
Jonty?
So, obviously, Gemma and I, you go back to Guildhall days, which is where we both trained at a classical conservatoire acting training. And I've been a professional actor ever since. And I've mostly made my living doing that. So what does that mean? And that has changed slightly over time. I've worked at the National Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, numerous times, number one tours, small parts, days on films and small television things, radio, voiceovers, both educational side of voiceover work, so English language tapes, but also commercial adverts on the radio and TV campaigns. This all sounds like that happens all the time. It's not. These things can be quite sporadic. But mostly it's been theatre.
You've been in the West End?
Oh, I've been in the West End, and all sorts of again, an acting career is portfolio based, and it's not all one particular strand. I suppose my particular strand that I've had most of has been in the theatre, and mostly in the subsidised theatre, which has given me a career and a lot of opportunity, and where I have practiced and honed my craft.
Yes. And so really then, from listening to both of you, I think it would be fair to say that relatively both of you have been very successful in your careers.
We've made it work, and I think that's
a degree of success.
That's a degree of success. We've managed to.
We've made a living doing what we do.
Doing what we train to do, and
buy a small house, and we had to move out of London where we were living at the time, and that felt that
was a wrench.
It was a wrench.
So quite simply, how has COVID affected you?
It's a difficult thing for me to talk about, actually, because I have been incredibly lucky, and I'm one of the few. This company that I'm working for at the moment, the RSC, have effectively furloughed not their entire, but their acting company that were going to do the summer season in their biggest theatre. So they have kept on their actors, and every other theatre in the company has had to let go all of their casts because they are all running on very tight reserves, and in order for them to survive, they've had to cull their workforce, basically. And so I'm in an incredibly privileged position, although in the same breath, it is a great pity that not all of these companies were able to do that as a standard thing, because anybody who worked in the offices or in the PAYE section, not the self-employed departments, not the freelance departments, have been furloughed. So all of the companies were able to access the furlough scheme. And it's meant that there's been a massive rift in who has been entitled to help. And it becomes a political thing ultimately, but it shows you how precariously the freelancers that contribute to the biggest part of any theatre or arts organisation, which is the putting on of the work, which brings in the revenue. These are all the departments that have been let go. Yeah. And that is, it's incredibly unfair, and it's a real crack in the system that COVID has exposed.
My situation, that basically everything stopped. I was working at the beginning of the year, and then I was planning on taking. I'd been working quite solidly for a while, and I was planning to maybe have a little bit of breathing space. But the way that my work stuff always comes in, you know, and I had some recording planned, recording of my own music planned, and there was sort of, I was kind of putting things in place, and then when COVID hit, all of that got shut down. So basically, I had just a completely empty diary for the rest of my life.
Actually, both of you, although, so Laura, you haven't been able to work at all. Jonny, you haven't been able to work at all, but you've been getting paid effectively.
We've been supported, yeah.
I mean,
exactly.
Jonny's still done some stuff.
The RSC managed to do some outdoor stuff in the summer, which I was massively part of, and it felt very important to be sort of leading on that as a project, which was just outdoor Shakespeare in Stratford, you know, letting the town know that things were going on. It was profile for the company to let people know that we would come back, that everybody's working, even though the building's shut, everybody's really working hard to try and work out how it could be opened again, under what protocols, what safety measures would need to be put in place. And of course, what I've noticed, a lot of the smaller venues and a lot of the commercial venues, they have been able to respond in a much different way to a subsidised sector venue, because their survival is financed differently, basically. So a lot of commercial producers are saying, well, we're losing money anyway by being closed, so let's just open something, because at least there'll be some energy about that.
Right.
And so some of the commercial producers, and we're not talking about big names here, we're just talking about, you know, various people are going, well, I'm going to do something. So a West End producer opened his production of Educating Rita at the Minack Theatre in Cornwall, which is open air, just because it was like, well, look, I'm losing all this money, we might as well put it on somewhere, do something that's possible. So people are really trying hard to generate that energy, even if it's they're not ultimately, they're going to be losing money or not making any money. I think the circumstances are such now that it's like we've got to just shift the story somehow and do something, because the inertia and the dispiriting nature of everybody just standing still, worrying and working out, you know, anyone in management in the arts at the moment must be working out every day. They must be reworking different protocols of how they could be crunching the numbers and what the numbers mean. And then it's like, well, we just need to get something on, because people, particularly whilst the weather was good in the summer, there was that feeling, I think we all had it, of we can get outside at least. We can go and look at things, whether that's nature or actors socially distanced in a garden, just saying some words out loud.
And there was a real hunger for that in Stratford as well. It was incredibly popular, people coming to see
people came to see it again and each weekend over the summer. And it was very moving, actually. You know, and I think music has... I think a lot of people are missing stuff. You know, Netflix is only going to be good enough for so long. The live experience for people is...
I think it's certainly been very tough for musicians, because not being able to play music with other people has been really painful. It's been really difficult.
Laura, I spoke to Richard Dempsey this morning, and he said that he felt that the musicians generally have had one of the hardest deals. Have you had any support from the government?
I have, because I fell in the you know, I qualified for the self-employed income support, and there's a multitude of ways in which people of all ages have fallen through the gaps, depending on how long they've been self-employed, what proportion of their income has been self-employed. But I was very lucky in that I qualified. I happened to qualify. But
a lot of lighting designers, choreographers, directors, they've all slipped between the cracks because of the nature of the freelance, the way your freelance career is funded.
We have a friend who's the head of a department at a major theatre, and she was on a freelance contract. She holds that position, but on a freelance contract, and she had been there for less than a year, or a year?
No, a year.
A year.
Yeah.
And previously to that, she had been not self-employed. She'd been employed by one of the big conservatoires. And because of that, she didn't get furlough from the employer, and she didn't qualify for self-employed income support. And this is somebody who's at
top of her game,
top height of her career,
top of her game, in a position revered by her sector.
Yeah.
No, it's been very worrying.
Yeah.
So we are beyond grateful to the government for the small amount of money that Ado's got. He's been able to get that self-employment money, and also the Arts Council money, of course. But I think, just going back on what you were talking about, the venues and how they're having to continuously adapt to different policies and procedures. My friend Laura, who works at the Anstice, where the job I just left, she's now managing through this ever-changing environment, and it's so time-consuming. A lot of venues can't afford to adapt.
Well, it's such a precarious industry at the best of times. And, you know, all of the venues were going, well, it's fine, we'll be back up and running by Christmas, so our panto will be able to get us back onto an even keel. And then, of course, you know, we were hitting August, and it was looking unlikely that even, you know, nobody's been able to plan. And what these sorts of crises, it seems to me, do is expose the frailty of the systems. Yeah. And it's not just been in the arts. You know, the restaurant industry and the hotel industry has suffered exactly the same thing. And actually, I went into a cafe in the summer in Stratford, and the owner of the cafe was like, oh my God, when's the theatre going to open? Because we are nothing without the theatre. And, you know, I haven't heard anybody say that for a really long time. You know, you walk along the South Bank at Shakespeare's Globe, all of those restaurants and pubs and bars around there survive because of the Tate Modern and Shakespeare's Globe.
Yeah.
There's nothing else around there.
No. So what's it like? What is it like down there now?
Well, I haven't been, but you know, apparently the West End is dead.
Mm.
I mean, you know, you're seeing the odd shots of people going crazy in Soho, but all the industries are kind of going, well, what are we here for?
How have you kept motivated?
Jonny was actually doing a huge amount of what I'd call voluntary work, because Jonny's on the stage committee for Equity, the union, and Jonny is also his union rep for his company at the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Yeah.
So Jonny was doing a huge amount of stuff as a kind of liaison between the union and the company and individual actors wanting to phone, because nobody really knew what was going on. So Jonny was on the phone or on Zoom a lot, and you've sort of forgotten about that he actually kind of was doing a lot of work for the industry just on a voluntary basis around that time, and we grew some vegetables. I cooked a lot of food. I think in the initial stages it was so sort of destabilizing. It was like, what can I do? I will plan meals. I think we were also we felt extraordinarily fortunate, being out here. Really, I mean, my God, it came into its own because we have a garden here and we can walk 5-10 minutes up the road and we're in countryside. And it was an extraordinarily beautiful spring, and so those were huge consolations. And so we had a very, very different experience to our friends who live in flats in London.
But I mean, we joked with other actors, but it was like, you know, well, we're quite used to being out of work, but this is something else. And I think the fear of it and the terror of it is that there's no time scale about when things might resume. And actually, and I do think things will resume. At what scale they'll resume, whether theatres will be scared to employ large casts again, and things like that will be issues that everyone has to face. But
yeah, I mean, that's something that I've noticed, that a few theatres are starting to open and do live performances, but when you look at what those live performances are, they're one-man shows, or they're, you know, and yes, you can afford to put on a one-man show because it only has to pay one person, you know. Yes, so that worries me hugely. And in fact, what my next question was going to be, what do you think is going to happen to our industry?
I think one of the things that I've observed that is happening at the moment, and this actually does pay into the answer of the question that you've asked, is that it's been an opportunity for everybody to go, we shouldn't be doing it like we've been doing it. This has exposed the cracks of how we do it. What we've all been able to do is go, okay, whilst we've been doing nothing, is analyse what hasn't worked and what doesn't work. And what doesn't work is going to be part of the solution of when we can start again and how we can start again, I think.
That actually sounds quite positive. I'm feeling quite buoyant by what you're saying there.
I hope that when we come back, it won't be back to normal.
So where do you see yourselves a year from now?
Alcoholics.
You know what? I mean, I felt like I've had to kind of just not look that far at the moment, because it's sort of impossible to say, and I found it's easier to either have a very, very short-term view or an incredibly long-term view. We just don't know about next year. The situation here is not the same throughout Europe. Elsewhere in Europe, work is being made. I think it varies hugely from country to country, but not every country has seen the sort of wholesale mothballing or shutdown of the industry that we've seen in this country. And so but then we're also talking about countries that generally have much higher public subsidy for arts.
Yes,
than
like France, for example.
France, Germany. In terms of dealing with the future, I think that I really struggled for quite a long time. I'm doing much better now, partly because I've got a couple of music commissions, which are one which is definitely going to be performed in March, because if it can't be performed live, it will be filmed, and the other one which is was originally going to be much earlier in the year, but it was going to be October and has been put back to March. That connection with working with other people, making work for other people, for audiences, and that sort of connectivity is why I do the job, I think.
I think there is going to be, after the Second World War, people went to see comedies. Noel Coward's plays went like that. He had huge success, and it was part of how the nation dealt with the grief of the post-war trauma of that. There is going to be a massive headache, and I don't just mean I mean a migraine from all of this. And no, I think artists know that the art is going to be the thing that saves everybody. I don't mean save, but I mean it's going to help people work it out.
There's going to need to be a sort of processing of a national trauma, really, and everything that this is meant, because in the same way that the pandemic has brought out things in our industries, it's done that in every sort of strata of society, from sort of pointing, that institutional, unfairness, institutional racism, these all of these things which, obviously people have known about and have been, talking about for a long time, but it's sort of been something about this moment that has made people go, oh yeah, no, I really see it now. Yeah. Rather than it being a kind of theoretical thing or sort of abstract thing that doesn't really connect. I think it's a lot has come to the surface that,
and I think that I don't really want to get into the politics of it all, but we look to leadership in these difficult times, and I don't just mean governmental. I mean in sectors of the arts as well, and the status quo. So within a freelance world, why should the buildings be getting all the money? Why should the buildings that are now closed and dormant be getting that subsidy and funding? And I'm very grateful for it, at the moment, of course I am. But it's making me question how we value and where we place value, and who we place the value on, and should that be really more on people all the time? And my answer, I think, really is yes, it should be.
Okay, so I was going to ask you how you felt that the government and Arts Council, etc., how they have dealt with the situation, and what your thoughts were on that. So
the Arts Council are part of a system. They're administering this bailout money, and maybe this process of people reapplying and having to really look at what it is that they do, what do they offer their community, has been very key and central to, I think, people getting the funding that they get again. And I think there is an agenda. There's always an agenda with these things, and I think the Arts Council's the tacit agenda has been to do with digitalisation and moving things into a digital age, and and I work in an industry which is really the oldest form of entertainment in the book. It's somebody telling a story, and there's nothing digital about that, and that will always exist in some form. So I'm sort of not worried about theatre long term. I really am not. The revenue that it brings to the Treasury speaks for itself, as is the case with the music industry. But it's how these organisations are really going to need to speak to the communities that have been damaged by Brexit, by 10 years of austerity and all of this. You know, you know it from your community and your hopes of what the Anstis would have been and could be and could still be. And it's really, how is that shared fairly? And then who are the people that then choose how that money is spent?
Yes.
And that's what I mean about leadership. Mostly, I'm sure those people are very good that make those decisions, but we have a responsibility to question those choices, I think.
I think that there's always a frustration for people working in the arts when it comes to how the value of it is recognised. But I think that there's always been a squeamishness about talking about the value it brings to people's lives in other ways, or a kind of blindness to the ecosystem of it, not connecting the fact that maybe a production like Warhorse started out as in a workshop with people running around with cardboard boxes on their heads, and that had to be funded. I think that there's a sort of blindness to that sort of thinking that the big West End shows live in a different planet to the small touring productions, or live in a different what people maybe consume on Netflix, that the actors that they love seeing, that they cut their teeth, you know, doing
in Stratford or at the Orange Tree, or touring with Odd Socks, you know.
There's a lot of people making great work, but at great personal cost, by the skin of their teeth. And a huge number of people doing basically self-exploitation. So it's like, yes, I can get my show on, but I'm going to have to work all of this time. I will work all of this time unpaid. And, you know, I'll get paid for this little bit of it, but all of this administrative stuff that I'm going to have to do, I'm going to work unpaid in order to have the opportunity, in order to be able to actually bring this piece of work out and for it. And there's just vast amounts of that in the arts.
And the problem with that, the inconsistency of that, and the different values that artists have in relation to what they will do for what money, I think causes a massive problem, because it means that some people are doing work because they just want to work and because they're passionate about it, but they're doing it for nothing, which unfortunately enables people to then have that opinion that they can ask people to do it for nothing.
Yeah.
You know, and so it is very, and there's no other industry like that, is there? You know,
you wouldn't ask a plumber to put a boiler in for nothing, would you?
No.
A wonderful theatre company that I've done a decade of fantastic work, and who I've written music for, have just folded, and they've decided that they can't go on. And I thought I've thought a lot about something they said in their statement about why they were closing, and it was that they would never couldn't conceive of exploiting other workers to the extent that they have themselves been exploited. They have had to exploit themselves just in order to make work.
What has made you the saddest about this current situation?
For me, just off the bat, it's the graduates at the moment. I feel sorry for that generation who are coming in and who are going to be hit quite hard by opportunities in the first instance.
Are we talking about what makes us saddest specifically in terms of the impact on the arts? No, I think the thing that made me saddest was the medical workers who didn't have the PPE and who died of COVID. I think that, you know, there's, you know, some of the nurses who had kids. Sorry, it's really sad. It's horrific. You know, people who were, you know, giving their absolute all, and who didn't get the protection that they should have done, or that, you know, the exposure at the point when, you know, not enough was known about the disease and its transmission. I mean, I think that's just the most heartbreaking thing.
I feel sad for the for people whose parents have died in care homes. That is alone is no way to die.
Which brings me to the question: how do you feel the government's fared?
Yeah, I don't think they've handled it very well.
I'm pretty angry about it. I'm staggered by how poor they've been. Absolutely staggered. Yeah.
Okay. My final question is, what would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, blimey. A musician once said to me, a career is something that you look back on rather than that you plan for. And to be honest, I've ended up doing stuff that I might not have expected. And so maybe that's what I hope for in the next 30 years, is some good things that I didn't expect. Yeah.
That's an excellent answer.
I want a blue plaque. Jonathan Broadbent, light comedian, short light comedian, lived here.
Perfect. A glorious ending. Jonny and Laura, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you, Gemma. It's been a pleasure. Really interesting.